Hey everyone, this might be a very small audience, but I feel there were a couple of people that cared about Janko from the Impulsive podcast, especially when he left. I didn't particularly watch a lot of it, or even know much about him, but I have to admit that he's probably had one of the worst experiences as a podcast host, with more often than not, him being the butt of the joke, or just being insulted outright. It's so weird because kind of jokes you expect to happen behind the scenes, but when you see it on camera, it's way more jarring. And with a podcast set, the atmosphere is way drier, so whenever there's some awkward tension between people, it feels way worse. However, one thing I can say about this drama that came with others is that the person who was being disrespected actually came out of it in a better place, with George breaking off starting his own podcast. I respect that, because most people get as much hate as him from fans, who then spend all of their energy to kind of fight back on Twitter. But nonetheless, I still feel bad for him for his entire stay on the Impulsive podcast, just being miserable.
It's now been almost 9 months since George Janko left the Impulsive podcast. As you all probably know by now, things went south when he walked out of the Bobby Lee podcast, and they got even worse.
I like how that guest tried to pull him in, but he fell over.
His religion. After that, things were never the same, and it felt like George's days on Impulsive were numbered. Then, just a few months later, he disappeared from the podcast. At the time, people had a lot of questions about where he was, but there weren't many answers. Logan, Mike, and George were all very secretive about it, carrying on as if nothing had happened. But as the weeks went on, they started
you know how they say the camera adds 10 pounds to the face? That beard adds like 50.
Shading Logan and Impulsive, and make jokes on his podcast about how poorly he was treated. And Logan and Mike would make sly digs that were quite clearly about George.
I obviously have been a Christian my entire life. I don't talk about it very much on this channel because I don't feel the need to always be talking about it.
I love this outlet. I love this outlet, and it exists because people watch. And without people watching, I just have a show like...
A day after this episode of Impulsive was released, George made a tweet saying, "To the Impulsive fans, I'm so sorry. I can't speak about things. Not my choice. I do love you guys, and for those of you sending me the clip of them talking shit, it's all love. I've already moved on from that toxic environment." People assumed the reason George couldn't go into detail about it was because he was legally bound from doing so, and he ended up confirming this a couple months later in a podcast with Howie Mandel.
They very much made it clear that I'm not allowed to speak up about things. So I can't even...
Legally?
Yeah.
Was this I didn't know that you guys were in a legal...
Well...
I mean, I think it's very common for people to, once they leave a group or a company, they have to sign an NDA, because of course it makes sense, especially with him, because I've seen some of the contests before, where they were very clearly not liking each other. So it makes sense why they would be scared of him, speaking out.
I said, okay, then how about we discuss this, what you've guys done. Let's talk about this. And he goes, yeah, do it. And then I go, okay. And so I tweeted out, I wasn't going to talk out of respect for the man.
So,
and then his attorneys hit me up and said, hey, let me remind you about the stuff you've signed.
He went on to explain that the Bobby Lee episode was cut to make him look bad, and that the drama that came from it ruined him.
That Bobby Lee episode was edited.
He was touching him in a
and
weird
they made me look like I wasn't a comedian.
right there.
That can't take a joke, even though every episode they make jokes on. And the reason I walked away was definitely not put in there.
Did it make for a better show the way it was cut?
That made me miserable, dude. That put me through a
His
fucking
eyes.
terrible time.
The eyes never lie, Chico.
Again, without doing the show?
If they change their hearts, I'm not proud to call them friends.
Apparently, George leaving Impulsive was his decision. Logan and Mike actually offered to take him back shortly after he left, but he said
I really
no.
want to see the context of how they met him, because from all I've seen from the podcast, they really don't seem like the group that would have enough chemistry to be not only be friends, but also invite him to the
He has a
podcast.
whole team to look after, including his sister who left her job to work with him, and his girlfriend who co-hosts his podcast. But even with all that responsibility, he decided to leave Impulsive behind. In the months following his exit from Impulsive, it started to become clear that George's podcast had legs. He'd built enough connections during his time in Logan's
I like the saying. It's better than saying it got traction. I like the saying it got legs.
Many of his guests would ask about what happened between him, Logan, and Mike, and bit by bit, he would give away more details. On one episode with Gideon, who's also a devout Christian, George revealed that he actually tried to stop Logan from posting the podcast where he trashed Christianity.
I know Logan behind closed doors. I know he has very terrible qualities, but I also know he's a very good man too. He has a good heart. He does good things. So when I saw him do this, I begged him not to post it. Not because of me. I knew I was going to be like, oh, this is great. This is going to make me look amazing.
Yeah.
but I knew it was gonna hurt my friend's image, like in a really bad way. So I begged him 3 times, don't post that video.
Pretty nice. In an industry like this one on YouTube, it is very rare for someone to care more about the image of someone than getting them getting a famous clip that will get them more popular.
Find a God instead of trying to be God.
At this point, we'd heard a lot more about what happened from George's perspective than from Logan or Mike's. But in October 2023, Mike appeared on the No Jumper podcast where he explained things from his side.
All right, so what happened with the George situation? I gotta ask that, 'cause that's what the
Right, nothing against Mike. I'm sure he has a lot of fans. I'm sure he's got legs. But I have to say that out of all the 3 people on the Impulsive podcast, he definitely is my favorite. All I've seen of him is just like sucking Logan's dick, making him feel way better. And I'm pretty sure the only reason why he was brought on and even like forced to be friends with Logan is to become like a mini manager where like he puts on the face of being his friend, like the best friend he's ever had, while keeping tabs on every little thing he does. I might be wrong because I haven't fully looked into it, but when I first heard that, I immediately believed it because it does like suit his character of just trying to like boost someone
I
else.
don't want to say he was like almost too pure for the show, but like he just he would
Nice
just get
stud,
like
dumbass.
abused by like certain guests, and it was kind of like fucked. Because you gotta understand, and
was it the Shaq episode or Bobby Lee?
Bobby, like all like you gotta understand it, and I think a part of that was based on like seating and also like the fact that he you know, me and Logan are such big personalities, so by way of him not being able to like super vocalize, he kind of like perceivably assumed the role of like the beta, which he wasn't.
Yeah.
But like guests would, when they would get like kind of uncomfortable or whatever with conversation, they would turn and kind of pick on him.
This was the first time Mike spoke about what happened in this much detail. He went on to say some kind words about George and congratulate him on the success of his podcast.
George is potentially one of the purest, you know, most grounded, conservative, family-oriented, loving people in the world. Like just a overall sweetheart. By the way, like kudos to him. He's got his own show now. It's going great. He's had great guests on. He's been able to do something more aligned with his purpose in life.
A couple weeks after this podcast went out, Mike chopped up some of the nice things he said about George and uploaded it as a clip to TikTok. George saw this and posted an
Wait, on Mike's actual TikTok, because that is pretty it does feel like artificial.
If you're interested, you're welcome to come on and discuss the truth. I'm just not into the fake stuff. By come on, George meant come on his podcast, and Mike responded to this on Jeff FM saying he'd be happy to, but it still hasn't happened. It's clear there's still some bad blood between them, and who knows if it'll ever get resolved. A month later, on December 7th, 2023, George dropped what almost instantly became his biggest podcast ever, the interview with Andrew Tate.
I was gonna make a joke about like, because that image earlier looked a lot like Andrew Tate. I know it was Mike, but the way that his beard was shaven off, it looked so much like him.
Sit down with Andrew, and the episode didn't disappoint. They spoke about everything from monogamy to religion to depression, and George brought out a side of Tate we don't.
Okay, immediately I'll give my full support to George for flying all the way to Romania. I don't give a if he interviews someone shitty like Andrew Tate. If he's willing to go to the country,
You've given me a lot to think about. And without being arrogant, at my echelon, it's not often I sit down with somebody and they say something that makes me think. But you've given me something to think about, and I genuinely, I'm going to think about it.
In just a day, the podcast racked up millions of views on YouTube, and as of December 24th, it's sitting on over 9 million views. To put this into perspective, this means in just the 17 days it's been out, the podcast has racked up more views than 403 out of 408 Impulsive episodes. And I'd say there's a chance it eventually reaches more views than Impulsive's most viewed episode ever. George has since released part 2 of the podcast, which is also doing really well, and his channel has grown by over 300,000 subscribers. This is obviously huge for him, and the cherry on the cake is the amount of praise he's been getting. Man, in the years I've watched your content, I've always been so impressed with the way you can navigate any conversation with any person. You're a great speaker. This was a brilliant example of that. Glad to see the show is doing so well. I remember when Logan Paul mocked George for starting his own podcast. Nothing is better than a good underdog story.
That is true. I'm surprised he hasn't brought up that part of the story of just Logan dunking on him.
George made was leaving Impulsive. I'm so happy to see this podcast doing so well. Great conversation skills. Dude is seriously talented. The same week George released the Tate podcast, Impulsive released a podcast which bombed. It was with a 13-year-old girl.
They released their own podcast with Andrew Tate, and it was just like some midget cosplaying as him, just like dragging the viewers.
40k views in its first first 11 days. Viewership for Impulsive has been down as a whole, and I couldn't help but notice how the tides have turned given it was just a few months ago that Logan was making fun of George's podcast viewership. What's more, the vibe between Logan and Mike has been really off recently, and it turns out they're nowhere near as close as they used to be.
Mike's really sad that you guys haven't been hanging out.
You're sad we aren't friends anymore?
Yeah, I mean,
so lame.
I called manager Jeff about it the other day. I'm gonna be up front, bro. You don't talk. We don't talk anymore. This show.
Aren't you both like fully grown men? Like it just feels like two kids in playground. Like you haven't come over to my house in 2 weeks. We haven't played on the PlayStation.
We haven't seen each other as much. I think that might be part of the issue. I think that might be part of the problem.
When you consider all of this and the declining viewership Impulsive has had for a while now, George getting out when he did seems like a pretty good decision. Now, of course, the success of one interview isn't enough to say George is now big time, especially since a lot of his other podcasts struggled to break 100K. But this is just the first season of his show, and he's already managed to get some incredible guests. So who knows what the future holds?
Like this guy who I don't know.
At the start of this year, being treated like a third wheel and disrespected by guests, being mocked for walking out on the Bobby Lee podcast, and having heated arguments with his co-host and boss, I think we can all agree he's coming.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, it is his boss technically.
His own podcast, and it's nice to see it working out for him. You can really see just how much happier he is now than his days on Impulsive.
Right now, it's like, man, and I know this sounds crazy, but like I'm in the most happiest place I've ever been in my life.
No.
It felt like before I was hanging on to God and I was like losing my grip. And now it's like God's holding on to me and it's impossible for me to leave. It's just like I'm here and I'm locked in and I'm confident about where I'm at. And now it's like, even if the devil took everything away from me, I would just have a smile on my face. Like, you have nothing on me. I found my true happiness. Yeah. And my happiness is sitting in the presence of God. And there will be nothing that could ever steal me away from him now. That's truly how I feel.
That's your respect there. See, this is why saying drama like this is kind of dumb, because it really just, it forces like all the people involved to like kind of like be cutthroat towards each other. You know, I feel like at the end of the day, it really is just people who don't enjoy being around each other, and even worse, being put in your podcast where for 1 hour you're forced to just speak to them. I feel like in podcast environments, even people who are best friends really start to like hate each other when they have to record like maybe once or twice a week, because at that point you have to like make it really like something entertaining as opposed to just like relaxing with your friend. Some people can do that, but when it's something big like Impulsive, then it really is hard to like maintain that relationship, also making it seem good like on camera, which is why I definitely believe that stuff like this happens way more off camera, where it's not as well known because it isn't like in your face compared to like on a podcast where every video you have fans like, oh, someone like, oh man, this one seemed really off. I feel like it's getting like bullied by the other guest or host, which it was absolutely, because you can just check like the comments full of people being like, I don't like George, which fair enough, but I feel like once you start like antagonizing him for leaving and like labeling him as like a coward, like some people, I've seen people say that in the comments, but once you do that, it just feels really immature. Because I respect him for like going out, making his own podcast, as opposed to like being too scared because of all the Logan Paul fans that he gained previously. But I'm glad that he was able to like branch off from it and make like the stuff he wants to do that he gained previously. And even if they don't support his current podcast he's doing right now, I still prefer him like doing the stuff he wants to do that makes him more happy. But when you're first starting off like he is right now, it is only natural because there will be people who just don't want to watch it. But over time, you will slowly get more and more fans that actually enjoy it and don't just want to comment like how much they hate you, which, you know, I'm happy for, because he really does seem like a really nice person that has no place to be like, not even friends, but like even know people like Logan Paul and Mike. Like this drama right now, I don't really care about it. I just really want to know like how were they pulled together by fate to not only be friends, I guess friends, but also be on the same podcast. That's the only thing I care about, to be honest, man.